Hey guys, I hope that you enjoyed the activity I left yesterday for you and it kind of gave you kind of an introduction into where we're going. So this unit we're going to be talking about quadratic equations. I want you to know quadratic equation is just an equation that contains x squared. So our standard form of a quadratic equation is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, and c are just numbers. So it might be like y equals 4x squared minus 3x plus 6. Whatever, right? You may be missing some of the parts and things like that, and we'll get into that more, but this is kind of your standard form. Just like when we looked at linear equations, it was y equals mx plus b, right? Or we had ax plus by equals c, right? So we have these things, these different forms. So this is just your general form right here. Please know, like we talked about with function notation, sometimes instead of y, you may see f of x if I'm using x as my variable. Please remember, f of x is just your dependent variable. This is like your y. It may not necessarily have an x. It may be a t. So if I use t instead of x, you may see this written as f of t. And we'll talk more about that as we go, just like some background. So please know, quadratic equation just always has your independent variable squared. So x squared, r squared, whatever squared. You see an exponent of 2. What I want to do today is talk about looking at a graph of a quadratic equation. What are some key features? Because these are going to be really important to us moving forward. So I have a graph here and a graph here because I want to reference them both. So here's some big things I want to talk about. A parabola. We've heard this before. This is the shape of your quadratic equation. It's this U shape, right? Please know it can open different ways. It can open up, down, left, or right. In our class in Algebra 1, we're only going to see parabolas that open up or down. Left or right will come later on. So when we look at this, how do we know? Well, how you know is if you think about your two sides, which way are they going? Look at these arrows. This is going up, right? So this parabola opens up. Whereas this one, if you look at the sides, they're going down. So this parabola opens down. Here's kind of like a trick you can think. So when it's like this, it looks like a smile, right? So when you're happy, you're up, you smile. So if it looks like a smile, your parabola is opening up. However, this one looks like a frown. You frown when you're down, right? So if it looks like a frown, it is opening down. Okay, so that's the first thing I'm going to talk about. The second thing is this really important term called a vertex. Your vertex is your highest or lowest point. So remember, these sides will go on forever. So it's not like there's a high point coming out here or a low point. What we're looking for is where does your parabola turn? So this point right here is my vertex. So for this parabola, my vertex would be at 1, -2. So for this one though, remember these are going to keep going forever, right? So what I'm looking for is where does my parabola turn? Oh, it starts to turn right here. So my vertex for this would be at 2, 2. All right, the next thing I have is maximum and minimum. Your parabola will only have one of these two, not both. So it's just like you think. Maximum means up, high, big. Minimum means low, small, things like that. So if you have this parabola that opens up like this, it will always turn at the bottom, meaning it is at the bottom point, you have a minimum. Whereas if you look at this one that opens down, you will always have a high point right here. This is called a maximum. So this has a minimum, this has a maximum. The next thing is something called your axis of symmetry. So this is like an imaginary line that divides your parabola in half, and if you fold it over, they would match up. Your axis of symmetry will always go through your vertex. So your axis of symmetry will go right up through that vertex. This is a vertical line, which means its equation should be x equals whatever number it's going through. So for this, our axis of symmetry is going through 1. So we'd say, oh, our axis of symmetry is x equals 1. So please remember your axis of symmetry will always go through your vertex. For this, here is your vertex, here's that imaginary line. So for this one, your axis of symmetry would be x equals 2. Okay, the last thing I have for you are called your roots. This is where your parabola crosses the x-intercept. So where do we cross along here? Oh, two places right here at 0 and at 2. This one would cross right here along the x-axis at 1 and 3. So a lot of times there are 2 roots, but there can be 1 root, 0 roots, and we'll talk about that more as we go. This is really big, and I need you to make sure you are aware of this. Your roots, they have different names. Sometimes they're called zeros, sometimes they're called your x-intercepts, sometimes they're called your solutions, right? You can have any of these names. The deal is, depending on if we're looking at a graph or an equation, we might use a different term, but all of them mean the same thing. Where does your parabola cross the x-intercept? Please take a big note of that. Okay, so we just went through this one together. Here's what I'd like you to do. I'm going to show you this parabola. I'm going to close the other guy out. We'll just look at this one. So I'm going to show you this parabola. I want you to answer a couple questions for me. Which way does it open? What is the vertex? Does it have a maximum or minimum? What's your axis of symmetry? What are the roots? Please pause this video for just a second, try to answer these, and then we'll come back together and make sure you're good. So please pause this video. Okay, so which way does this open? Again, the sides and the arrows are all pointing down, so this opens down. What's your vertex? Remember, that's where your parabola starts to change, which is right here. So that would be at -3 and 2. Remember, your vertex is always an ordered pair. Okay, do you have a maximum or minimum? Well, where it turns is the top, so we are going to have a maximum. All right, what's your axis of symmetry? Remember, it always goes through your vertex. So this is something that trips a lot of people up, but it's super, super easy to do. Sorry, I'm just trying to get everything back on the same page. Give me 1 second, sorry, trying to get everything to stay on one page. Okay, so your axis of symmetry will always go through this point. Remember, this is the x point of your vertex. So if you look at this x point, how you can always write your axis of symmetry is x equals whatever this x value is. What is it going through? Oh, -3. And then last but not least, what are the roots? So where do I cross this x-axis? I cross at -2 and -4. A couple things. You may see this written as -2 and -4. Sometimes you may see it as x equals -2 and x equals -4. There's different ways we can write roots, and we'll talk about that as we go. But I just want to make sure you're good with kind of these key concepts of what we have. All right, I hope this was helpful. If not, please join my office hours and we can talk through this more. All right, love you guys. Bye-bye.